So welcome back to another Lifecycle Insights Friday workshop. It is Friday. It is not 3:31. It is April Fool's Day. It's 4/1. I definitely was building these slides on Thursday. So we've got just some really light housekeeping today. We're not going to talk long because Ryan had some amazing talking points when I went to the Write Up Boom conference, and I want to give him as much time as possible to enlighten you guys with the stuff that had me sitting out there going, "Oh my God, this is so cool! Everybody needs to hear it." So real quick, if you're new to the platform, which I know most of you guys in this group are long timers, but if you're new to the platform, we do run a new to Lifecycle Insights every Wednesday. Keep an eye on your mailbox. You've got some invites for that. Those are 4 weekly sessions where we help you get started in the platform kind of with a running head start. So make sure that you're dropping into those. We've had partners come to those for 3 and 4 months in a row just to make sure that they consume all of the knowledge in them. It's a little bit of pre-canned content, and then plenty of time for you guys to get your Q&A in. So if you've got questions, comments, something you don't know how to do, and you want to come hang out where somebody will be able to answer those questions, new to Lifecycle Insights is it.
For those of you that signed up this week, you'll get the invite on Sunday. So I see a couple newbies.
There you go. Marnie, you want to tell them about the results map webinar that's coming up?
Yeah, so I met the CEO of Result Maps, and as many folks in the space are EOS traction fans, I thought this would be an interesting one. They are an automation platform for basically tracking EOS tools, or the EOS process, the traction process. So April 12th at 2, we're going to be chatting about kind of just the way to track progress, set KPIs, et cetera, and make the magic happen. So we'll have more details on that for you, but I think it'll be an interesting conversation. It's a slick looking tool for sure. Yeah,
cool stuff. And then where are we going to be? We're going to be doing a little bit of traveling. I will be out at Channel Partners Conference in Vegas. My God, that's already only 10 days away. And Marnie is Nick going to Evolve again?
It's not Evolve. April 18th. It's Robin Robbins.
Oh, Robin Robbins. Why did I think that was Evolve?
I don't know. And it's in Tennessee. It's in Nashville.
Okay, I'm way off.
Otherwise, it's all correct.
Yeah, other than that, so somebody's going to be somewhere. There we go. This is why
he's not my sitter, so he doesn't have to keep track of those.
This is why I should not be left responsible for the things. So
it's like Carmen San Diego.
Right. In the land of the last time I was left to be responsible by myself, we went to this thing called Write Up Boom, and I fell asleep in a chair in a lobby, thanks to Jason Slagle and some drinking. But this was, in my mind, and this is why I wanted Ryan to come out and talk to you guys. In my mind, this was the best educational conference I've been to in 18 years in the space. It was absolutely amazing. And there were a lot of things that the folks in the room were probably a little better versed on than the average group of folks. And that's because they spend a lot of time in the Cybernation and following around Andrew and Ryan and Wes and Brian Blakely and all the other folks that they drag into this thing on the regular. So in the chat, I'm going to put this invite. If you guys do not already follow the Cybernation, who is the folks who sponsored the Write Up Boom, which again, best conference I've ever been to as far as educational content goes, make sure that you go follow them, attend their weekly calls. I think they canceled the one for this Monday, but normally every Monday they have a cyber call. They touch on topics that are near and dear to our hearts, but they do it from a very, very educational and thought forward position. So when they did this live, we got to see some really great folks talk. They talked about a few things that I brought home and said, our partners need to hear this. It really lends itself to Lifecycle Insights, the preparedness things that we're talking about with our customers. So with that, Ryan is going to kind of take it away, but we talked about BDR test restores, how to prioritize what to restore in the event of a mass event, tabletop exercises, and even what your client responsibilities are, and how you can walk through some of those in tabletop exercises and in those different events. So Ryan, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. We agreed we weren't going to do a bunch of slides and a bunch of silly stuff just so that we could, kind of ebb and flow with the conversation. So everybody feel free to jump in and engage in the conversation with Ryan, and let's let him take it away.
Yeah. So the the session that I did, which I believe caught the attention of Alex, was a session called BCDR at Scale. And what it was a session that was kind of like, so I also have a business continuity challenge as a practitioner at Datto. And so I have an entire BCP team that's dedicated to studying our continuity and our disaster recovery. And so we learn a lot as practitioners. And then I also get to see the challenges that MSPs have when they're dealing with, single client, full system, or multi-client ransomware incidents from a recovery perspective. And it's always, I shouldn't say it's surprising anymore. It's disheartening when you hear an MSP go, "Oh, I never thought of that. I didn't realize it was going to take that long." And so I was like, well, if I could put a session together that kind of culminates what I've learned from doing it at Datto and what I've seen the challenges be with MSPs, and tying that back to kind of this theme for Right of Boom, which is, MSPs treating themselves as customer zero and further securing themselves in order to avoid situations which, unfortunately, I think hundreds of MSPs to this point have found themselves in, which is a full system compromise, all customer ransomware incident, which our friends at Perch deemed a buffalo jump. And so that's the backdrop for the talk, but there are really two main things that that I wanted to drive home. And it really, for me, is preparation versus reality. This is I tell this to Andrew all the time. And you've probably heard this, especially if you ever played sports, you have children that play sports, you have to practice the way you're going to play. And so what I'm not seeing MSPs practice the way they're going to have to play when it comes to a continuity and recovery incident for a single client or a multi-client. And so I actually do some math, which I'm actually going to share the slide. I'm going to walk you through the math, which really I think helps drive it home. But the preparation that largely people do is, they do local backups with, I'll call it, weekly integrity testing. Did the backup complete? Is the backup successful? Some people even check to make sure the backup is bootable, which you should definitely do, because that's the only way you can assure integrity, or you actually try to recover a file or so some people have processes to do that. And that's good. Like, that's baseline what you should do. Ideally, you have a solution that automates that for you. Then I'll see some MSPs do monthly availability testing, which is, can I restore files from backups? Can I do a folder file recovery from backups? Can I restore an entire server from a backup? Whether that's, backup to going back to physical, which we call a BMR, a bare metal restore, or a virtualization of a system, which again is good. It proves that the what I call the control effectiveness. It proves that your BDR solution is operating effectively and it's going to be there when you need it. But we still haven't tested at scale. We've done a couple file restores and we've assured virtualization works. That's not a scale test. That's a sniff test.
Well, and I ran an MSP for 16 and a half years, and I just never thought about the fact that, the thought never occurred to me to test what it would be like to restore all of my customers at once. And you say restore at scale. I want to make sure everybody's really thought through what that means.
Yeah, we're going to get there. I'm kind of
okay.
We're dipping our toe in the shallow end of the pool right now, but don't worry, you'll be sinking or swimming in a minute. So then from an offsite backup perspective, right, because ideally you have a local backup copy and you have an offsite copy, and that offsite copy is ideally an immutable copy, which means even if you have an attacker resident in the network of you or your customers, they cannot interact or destroy that cloud copy, or that cloud copy has other protections in order to make it recoverable, even if there is a deletion event or destruction event, which we've been improving our products since 2018, when we first started to see these ransomware threat actors start to target backups. So we have a lot of things that we've done. We've learned a lot from there. So but when you do these quarterly availability testing, again, you're doing that restoring files from, but now you're doing it from offsite backups, right? So you're verifying, not only can I do it locally, but I'm also be able to do it in the cloud or wherever my cold storage location is for those backups. And maybe you also try to virtualize a system in the offsite location as well. That's generally where we see things stop, but none of that testing ever happens at scale. So that's the preparation that we see. But the reality is you are not restoring a single server. You're restoring N servers, multiple servers, where N is going to be defined by the scope of the impact. So the preparation, you're not practicing the way you're going to have to play, right? Number one. Often, especially if you do a DIY solution, and let's say let's say there's a vulnerability in some software package that or technology that you're using, and you did a DIY backup solution. Like, I don't assume that everybody here uses Datto, and for this call, I actually don't care. I'm kind of taking my Datto hat off. So let's say you did a DIY solution like Veeam. And let's say you have an RMM and you RMM manage the Veeam machine that does the backups and stores the backups. But the attacker actually compromises your lead tech's credential and leverages RMM to deploy ransomware. Well, that's going to land on your Veeam machine. And so your backups on your Veeam system locally are going to get encrypted and or potentially destroyed, depending on if the attacker, treats how they treat that Veeam system. So what we often see is, not Datto partners, but we've seen this for other MSPs that we've helped respond to incidents for, unrelated to backups, is that their backups are encrypted. And so you really have to think through, if I have an attacker resident in my network and I have a local backup appliance in my network, do I really have safeguards in place to prevent that backup from being encrypted or from being destroyed? So the reality is most times the backup is either destroyed or encrypted. And so it's unreliable. And thus the attacker wants that because they want you to be able, the only way for you to recover is to pay the ransom. And so a couple other things we see, which is storage is expensive. I'm sure you've had this conversation with countless SMBs. Oh, could we reduce the size of that backup server and cut my retention down so that maybe it works better within my budget. And so what happens is there's a concept called the recovery point objective. The idea is when you do recover from a continuity event, there's a certain amount of data that you're willing to tolerate having lost. That amount of data is expressed as a recovery point objective. And so what happens is, especially as customers grow and the size of their appliances don't grow, they'll change the retention settings over time to be less and less and less and less. And then, maybe I have an intact backup, but the intact backup is from yesterday, and I really had a 4-hour RPO on data loss. And so I've actually now incurred some sort of financial impact to my business because of not being able to meet the RPO for that based off of how I've configured retention. And then let's say you have a local backup appliance and you do virtualizations on that appliance. Well, your monthly and your quarterly testing of can I do a VM on that solution is great because it proves the ability to do the VM. But have you ever tried to run all the servers that you back up on that appliance? Does it really have the right amount of resources you need to do that? Or do you have some other strategy to allocate additional resources or additional compute to virtualize those images on? I don't know, right? But those are things you have to think through. But what we find is when people get in these situations, they're like, oh, well, yeah, I have the data, but I can't actually virtualize all the servers I need because I underscoped the size of the box from a compute perspective to be able to run the entire ecosystem. And so that's the reality of the situation. From an offsite perspective, depending on the solution, the offsite data may have been destroyed. I've spent probably my first 2 years at Datto, working to make sure that it was impossible for attackers to destroy a backup in the offsite location. My goal, which continues to be my goal, is I want an attacker to get access to an MSP that's a Datto customer and just say, it's not worth it. I'm not going to get the ransom payment and walk away. Or, these days they'll threaten to DDoS you or use some other extortion tactic to try and elicit payment out of you rather than using ransomware. So we also find that they're also virtualizing only the most critical servers to recover the environment, but they don't often know what the most critical servers are. And so it's literally, think about this situation. Let's say, pretend you have 10 customers. 5 of the customers got impacted by the ransomware. And you're trying to recover 5 different customer environments, but you don't know which systems are the most important to their business operations. So in the middle of dealing with legal calls and PR and response and stress and techs calling out sick because they can't handle it, and you're also needing to figure out, well, what's the most critical servers of my customers and how am I going to recover from them, because I've never actually done this pre-work to recovering at scale. And so generally what we find is the MSP has to go back, work up a giant list of all the servers in the order that they want to recover them in, because you cannot serialize the recovery of a lot of these things, especially when you're getting into the hundreds of servers. Parallelization of that is difficult. You do have to do some serialization, even if it's batch serialization, right? We're going to get through 30 servers at a time. What can we do here?
And we actually had a partner come back from that talk and talk through with us how to go into their PSA and just create a custom data field and build out those batches. This is a batch 1, this is a batch 2, this is a batch 3, this is a batch 5.
Idea.
Right?
Yeah.
And what they did with that, though, and you guys should think about that, is they assumed that their PSA was also going to be lost, and they mapped that custom data field over to Lifecycle Insights so that they had a backup of it. So they could go to either tool and see that serialization and know at what point they're restoring each appliance.
I mean, ideally, there's a process annually that we refer to in business continuity called the business impact assessment. That's really the time when you're assessing from a systems perspective what the recovery time objective is, the mean time to recover is, and the recovery point objective is. And really the criticality of the recovery of the system should be tied to its RTO and RPO objectives. And as you understand, that's why we talk on the cyber call a lot about data flow diagrams. How does data move and get processed through the environment? Because maybe you're, I'm not going to do a good job here, but maybe your the database server has a RPO and RTO of 4 hours, but you have the web server that front ends it as 8. Well, what good does having the database recovered do if the web server is not operational? They should really have the same RTO and same RPO, even though they're different systems.
Right.
And so you get to start to think through that, what order does the environment need to be recovered in order for the business process to be recoverable? Because when we talk about maximum tolerable downtime, which is another term, which is the combination of the recovery time objective and how long it takes you to recover the business process once the server's back online, which is what the RTO measures, right? That total amount of time is maximum tolerable downtime. If you can't get the business process back up and running by the maximum tolerable downtime, that's the failure from a continuity perspective. And so that's some of the stuff from that perspective. So then I did some, I kind of pulled the risks back out. I call it, I said risks to recovery. 1, incorrect retention settings on backups, reliance on volume shadow copies and running systems, because often most ransomware now actually destroys volume shadow copies, which hint is actually a way that you can detect ransomware on your systems. If something is destroying your volume shadow copies, that's a detection opportunity that could help you before, half your customers are encrypted. network accessible storage, especially in those DIY BDR solutions, anything that's CIFS attached or NFS, or just really anything that's like drive mapped, you should just expect that location is going to get encrypted due to mapping. So just be really careful about the use of network attached storage and make sure you have the right safeguards around that if you're going to use that. We didn't talk about this, but I do hope to get to talk to you more about this, is insufficient bandwidth at the SMB site. And I did some math after this presentation, and I'll share that with you. Tainted backups is another thing that we've seen. So there is a tactic, really it's a technique that we see. We haven't seen this against Datto partners, but I have heard about it for non-Datto partners, where the attacker will change the retention settings on your backup solution and then maintain persistence. So they'd be like, oh, I've been in your environment for 2 weeks. I'm going to reduce your retention to 2 weeks. So the only backup solutions you have to recover from, even though those might still be in your RPO, you're just going to be recovering a backup where I continue to have persistence to that asset. And so another thing I'd be looking for is errant changes or unapproved changes to retention settings on backup servers and agents. Local backup appliance failures, often due to the same event that affected live systems. This gets more into like your natural disasters. We primarily see those in like, tornado season, hurricane season, those types of things. But oftentimes MSPs in those areas go around and actually collect the BDR appliances from the end customers. They roll trucks before storms, actually collect them and take them to some secure location so that they still have the local copies. MSPs that don't do that then rely completely on the cloud, which can earthquake season. Yeah. Did I say earthquake? I meant hurricane. But yeah, there's a set of considerations there, and I do recommend
California, so it's always earthquake season.
Yeah,
that's the point.
Yeah. There's like 2.0s. That's nothing.
Yeah, as they have a big one tomorrow. You wait.
And then one of the things I say is risk recovery. Honestly, it's the game time decisions that you need to make on which servers to prioritize to meet MTD. That's where a lot of people fall short. So I'm gonna share the slide if I'm allowed to. I think I'm allowed to. And I'm gonna walk you through the math. You can see this?
Yes.
Okay. It says do the math.
Yep.
Okay. So let's say you have a single server and the maximum tolerable downtime for that server is 1 hour. So it's very, very short maximum tolerable downtime. That would make your RTO objective like 30 minutes. So probably only possible with a local backup copy. So your tech tests the recovery of that single server. And in ideal conditions, which is a normal day, no adverse situations, nothing else kind of going on, finds that 98% of the time they can recover that server and its business process within an hour. That's a great outcome, right? That gives you a lot of confidence. I can actually recover my system almost 100% of the time. But let's say there's also 50 identical servers with the same maximum tolerable downtime. You have 10 SMBs, each that have 50 servers, all with the same maximum tolerable downtime. This example is a little contrived because I have to do it to make the math simpler. But I think what I'm trying to do is build a more realistic scenario, multiple customers, multiple servers, relative maximum tolerable downtime, which I would expect your average maximum tolerable downtime is going to be somewhere between 12 to 24 hours, depending on the business. Probably more medium-sized businesses, that's going to be lower, maybe 4 to 8 hours. But for the example, and so let's say you feel so good about the testing your tech did that you provide a 90% SLA in your agreements with your customers. I guarantee you that in a continuity scenario, 90% of the time, I will be able to recover you without adverse business impact. You feel really good about that. So now let's say that SMB gets ransomwared, all of their servers. your chances of completely failing to miss the not recover any systems is 0, right? Because you have a 98% chance of success, which means you have a 2% chance of failure. 2% to the 50th power, because you have 50 servers, is 0%. But if you have 50 servers and 98% of the time you can recover them within an hour, 98 to the 50th percent is only 37%. So you actually, based off of that one test that your tech does that gives you confidence in your ability to recover every month, every week, you actually only are assuring a 37% probability that you could recover an entire customer. So your chances of failing to recover the customer in total are higher than the chances that you would be able to recover them at all, right? So like, I think I might have messed that up at the end, but I think you get what I was trying to say there, right? So in order to meet your 90% SLA, what does that mean? Well, working the math backwards, if you take kind of your 5 nines example, how many nines do you need to assure from an SLA perspective in order to have 99.8% success, in order to have a higher level of success? You need 99.8% success on a single node in order to meet your 90% SLA, right? Which means you effectively 2 out of every 1,000 tests are allowed to fail. So you basically can never fail to meet your single server recovery. But even a single server recovery is not always a good example. That's why you tend to need to do more. So let's say you expanded that out to a ransomware incident that affected all of your customers, say because of a tool stack compromise of a tool that you provide or that you deploy and manage for them. Your chances of complete failure are still 0, but there is a less than 1% chance that you will recover all their systems within their maximum tolerable downtime. So your chances of complete failure are, that's not a thing, but your chances of complete success are also not a thing, right? We went from 37 to 1%.
Hey Ryan, it's been asked if you'd be willing to share the slide.
You can take a screenshot of it. Yeah, go for it. And so again, in order to meet your 90% SLA in your contract, you would need 99.98% success on a single node, which means 2 out of every 10,000 tests can fail. How many of you are doing 10,000 tests to verify your recoverability? No one.
No
sane person would do that,
yeah.
Right? So then the question is, look, okay, well, what do you do? Okay, it probably scared the crap out of you. Probably you're like, yeah, that math checks out. By the way, I did have a math major from college verify the math for me, so I wasn't, looking too stupid on stage. But what I advocated for was a set of increasing tests. And tests for me, they never usually actually start with fingers on keyboard. They start with getting in a room. I call it Pizza Fridays, right? Get your techs, get a bunch of smart people in a room on Friday, buy a pizza and some soda, sit up on a whiteboard and say, 10 of our customers just got ransomware. How are we going to recover their environments? What's the order of operations? Which customer gets priority? Which ones have the most likely, which ones do we have, do we have SLAs with all of them? Some of them, what do our contracts say? Like, start thinking through the soft stuff that surrounds it that helps you get organized, figure out where you have work to do there. And then your next set of tests are what I call single SMB recover with local backups. Okay, you do 1 backup test a month. Why don't you try doing 10? Can you do 10? Can you do 10 and do it within the MTD for those systems? If you don't know the MTD, you probably shouldn't do the test. You should probably go back and do the business impact assessment, right? And so you start to get, and then the next set is, can I do that same thing, but can I do it with the offsite backups? And so at Datto, we have a team that we call the Code Red team. It's actually the team that if you call in and you have a ransomware incident, these are people that actually dedicate themselves to working with you and your techs on the recovery of your systems. And so that doesn't happen every day. And so you can imagine, think of it like a CPU that sits mostly idle. Well, what do we do to fill that CPU cycles? Well, we want them to be practicing their skills so that when game day comes, they're good, they're really ready to go. They're going to play the way they need to play. So we have MSPs call them up, schedule these large scale tests, and they actually practice recovery of multiple SMBs for an MSP. And it's part of the service you already pay as a Datto customer. And so this already exists.
Really good to hear though, because when this first came up when you were on stage talking about this, my brain went, I can't imagine calling my backup vendor and going, I want to recover all my servers on Friday just as a test. I can just hear many of the vendors in the space going, nah, that's not really a thing.
Yeah, I mean,
or, we're not going to dedicate the resources.
To be fair, you're probably not going to get same week recovery testing because we do schedule them.
But the fact that Datto looks at it as a positive, that we're asking them to help us do this test.
I mean, I also think about this.
And I hope the rest of the industry will step up and follow suit.
Yeah. So there's another, think about this from my side as a vendor. I want assurance that we can process large scale recoveries in a reasonable amount of time because we're a partner with you in your recovery. That's why we dedicate people from our staff to work with you. So I need to know if there's issues in my processes by exercising that process in a safe way so that I can make those improvements and make sure that it's ready for game day. But honestly, not enough Datto partners actually schedule those tests, in my opinion. So, I'm sure my Code Red team doesn't love when I say that they should do this, but the reality is you should do this. I'll make it up to them some other way. And so, the challenge I put out was using only offsite backups. You need to answer, how long will it take my MSP to restore on-site operations? On-site operations is the key here, right? You can virtualize in a cloud, but how do you get those workloads back to your site? Well, I could get into the Datto solution, but not all of you probably use Datto solution. So I think you need to think through that. Also, this is where the other part of the math I wanted to do, I didn't get a chance to. So let's say you have, what you say the average server size is maybe a terabyte, a couple terabytes.
Yeah,
so
in the SMB space, it's probably a terabyte or less. In a lot of cases.
But the bandwidth that they also have is mostly like DSL cable modem, maybe a T1, a business line, right? It's generally not that fantastic. And so if you need to download, let's say every one of those 50 servers for that customer is 1 terabyte. So you need to download 50 terabytes. How long does it take you to download 50 terabytes over a T1 line? And is that amount of time within your maximum tolerable downtime of an hour?
The server's out of date. The data is out of date again by the time you get it.
Yeah. And also, it could take you days to download all of that data. So now that what that means is, okay, well, do I have days to download the data? Well, maybe I do if I can virtualize the data in the cloud. And then I can somehow sync the changes that are happening in the cloud back to my on-premise solution later. That's where you really want to think through kind of a more robust solution to do that. Or now you're talking about shipping hard drives, because that's really your only other solution. Let me copy all that data onto a bunch of hard drives and because it's faster to copy that data local and to ship the drives, or at least it was pre-COVID, faster to ship the drives to the location than it was to actually try to download them from the cloud.
Yep.
For small servers, we can do reverse sends, which is effectively a push back to the device or a download from your internet service provider's, ingress egress speed. And usually your again, those aren't that great. So a lot of people think, well, I'll just download the data from the cloud back to my local site. But in reality, when you start doing that and your times keep going like this, you're starting to scratch your head and you go, oh man, I don't have a strategy. So another thing I would suggest is, why don't you go out and request for let's pick up smaller customer, or maybe a customer that has 20 systems that are backed up. Why don't you go in and request we call them a round trip. Why don't you go request a round trip, which is give me all give me the last 3 backup points for every server on a hard drive and ship them to me, and see how long that takes, so that you know when the game time comes, okay, well, I've worked with Datto before. I know that, a recovery of an environment that's roughly 20 servers to have the data shipped to me from hard drives is going to take 36 hours, right? Okay, so what servers have an MTD that's less than 36 hours? Those are the ones I either need to be able to download over the internet or virtualize in some alternate location. Again, for the offsite test. And so this is where a lot of people tend to rely on their local copies to get confidence in their SLAs. But because those local copies tend to be encrypted or destroyed, and they've never tested these scenarios at scale locally, let alone offsite, they don't start to think about the complexities of recovering offsite at scale. And so the only real way for you to feel confident and to be able to manage what is going to be probably the most stressful situation of your life, I'd say probably, because some of you may have already been through some pretty traumatic stuff in your life, but I guarantee you this is a PTSD inducing event for most people.
Yeah. You
want to do as much of that homework up front as you can. And so the math proves it out. You need to be able to do multi-system recovery tests within your maximum tolerable downtime 100 times in order for you to start to get reasonably comfortable that you could actually do it in reality. And so I think we need to rethink how we do BCR testing, and we need to think about it at scale. No, I'm not saying you should go from like weekly, did my backups succeed, to I need to do 400 server restore, because that's like saying, oh, I need to understand if I can operate with my primary data center down, let me shut the power off. Right? Like you don't get there by going straight to the most extreme. There's a set of tests you're going to want to construct along the way. For each of you, that's going to be different. You're going to have different levels of readiness, different levels of understanding. That's why you should start with that whiteboard session. What do we know? What do we not know? What new data do we need to go and gather from our customers to do this? And just start it. And I'm not advocating that you throw away your Q2 goals and do this, but I think big changes start in small increments, which is why you'll often hear me call out calls to action on the cyber call. Like, what if you sat down for an hour and you just tried to do this? And that tends to have a snowball effect. And so, I like this idea of Pizza Fridays, where every Friday you spend an hour working on a problem like this that surrounds the security space. And soon that thing has momentum and you're really starting to make material improvements. So that was kind of the spiel. I can flash the slide that actually had the recovery tests that I proposed you try, if you want to steal those too.
Yeah.
I almost labeled this deck "Steal This Deck." So works for me.
I think this is good, useful information for most people. I don't know about you guys, but at my MSP, we thought we were doing the right things, right? We thought we were doing the important things. We had a combination of Datto and Replibit. We were checking those screenshot images to make sure the restores were happening, and all the other things. But we actually had the instance that you talked about where the customer server just completely failed, and Dell didn't get us parts for, I don't know, it's 3 or 4 weeks that we had to run on our appliance, and our appliance was noticeably slower than their server. it was able to hold all the load. We had enough memory, but it was not, we were not popular based on the performance of our appliance in that crunch time situation. So they never lost any data. They never had any downtime, but they certainly felt it.
Yeah. I remember this has nothing to do with what we're talking about here, but I came from financial services, and early in my career, we had a Sydney, Australia office. And for some reason, there was an issue with their internet. The VPNs were still operational, but they couldn't actually browse the internet for whatever reason. And I was on the network engineering team at the time. And that the service provider was working on it, but these people needed to be operational. And so we actually wound up setting up a SOX proxy on someone's machine in our headquarters. So they're coming over VPN from Australia to Connecticut and going out a proxy. And like, at least they could get to the internet, but what a horrible experience. And it got me thinking about the productivity impact. Like, how much of their job were they actually able to get done over a VPN tunnel that has 350 milliseconds of latency and loss, going over a SOX proxy on a desktop PC, right? Like, that's crazy. And so like, that's kind of what we're doing when we're saying, yeah, we'll probably be able to recover with a local backup. Well, no, because in most cases, you can't rely on the local backups.
Yeah.
So start with the tabletops. The tabletops, though, you have to assume adversity. So like, one of my favorite things to do in tabletops is to take people out. So I'm like, oh, your lead tech's in the room. Oh, we'll do this. Oh, your daughter just had an emergency. She needs to go to the hospital. You need to leave right now. Make them leave the room. The rest of you have to carry on. What are you going to do? Right. And like, you have to, like, as you're practicing these things, throw in real world situational parameters so that you're practicing the way you're going to play. So I don't know if I'm out of time or if you want.
No, we've got till the top of the hour. So if you guys have questions, like, let's hear them. You've got a good opportunity to talk to somebody who's been through the ringer on this stuff. Don't turn it down.
Yeah, so you guys, I appreciate the Arnie call out. He's done that to me at every conference I've ever spoken at that he's been at too. What you don't know is Arnie's actually a huge fan of mine. I think there's just some old bad blood there that he wants to. Well, he always wants to try and put the screws whenever he can.
He had some choice words to try and put the screws to Kaseya too. I thought both of them were kind of tasteless. Yeah. That's just what it is. But I
mean, here's the deal: if you test it with Datto and we don't meet your expectations, you should know that, and so should we. Right? Like, not testing it is not an option for either of us.
Yeah.
And if we're going to really treat this like a partnership, like, it's not a good partnership if I'm like, you don't need to test that, you should just trust me. That's like saying, you don't need to worry about the software security of your RMM. You should just trust me that I got it.
Well, that's what Arnie said for 2 decades. Oh, wait. Sorry, that was rude. But I know all about the security standing of Automate. So, I think you guys should all kind of step back and look at this from what's the next small bite we can take to kind of improve this, because what I learned was that there's a lot of things we should be doing different, and some of them feel insurmountable when you go from zero to trying to restore all your servers at once. So I love the Pizza Fridays idea. If folks could take just 1 or 2 things away from this as next steps, what do you feel like they ought to be? I mean, Pizza Fridays is a great.
Pizza always sounds good on Friday, so I feel like that's a solid first step.
My boss did not send me pizza this Friday.
It might ruin some of your Friday dinner plans, because I know Pizza Friday nights are a big thing in some families. So pizza twice in one day might be a lot, but
never.
I'm always up for the challenge. So
that and blizzards are acceptable at any number of times a day.
So I have a question. How many of you have ever actually tested the recovery of an entire customer? And needing to do it during an actual security incident doesn't count, because that's not testing.
We used to
I
joke
see
about
one
that.
hand raised.
We used to joke that that we didn't have to test individual file backup because we had a customer that tested it for us at least every week.
Well, I mean, there is something to that, right?
Yeah.
Like,
There's something to that, but still, we need to take it a step further. I think that's what I learned.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think especially at scale, it's more about full system recovery at scale. Have you ever tried to do 500 bare metal restores from a local appliance, or from a dozen local appliances? How would you even do that logistically? Right? Well, are you going to start moving workloads to the cloud? How are you going to get the backup images from your appliances to the cloud? There's some things to consider there.
You see, you got the shout out from Wes in the chat. I have a client that requires it yearly, and you guys have always come through.
Well, and failback to production is a real thing. Rafi's talking about that. He said our problem is always failback to production. It was a Veeam provider that had the conversation with me about, they're doing replication to cloud, and that Veeam has this slick replication tool that lets you fail back from production. I'm pretty sure Datto has something like that in it.
We call it it's I'm not sure if it's fast fallback or rapid rollback. It's one of the two. But we can basically take the delta between the image that is being that was copied back and what changes have been made in the virtualization, and actually sync that set of changes back down in a smaller increment to the system. So
you're syncing megs and gigs.
Yeah, you can literally get your RPO to like minutes and seconds doing that. And it buys you days to get that data back on site on a server ready to go, because you're operating virtually in the cloud.
So one of the other things that was interesting that was said, and I don't remember where it came up, was just what your client responsibilities are in all of this, right? If you took just my old MSP, we were supporting about 50 clients on 4 engineers and me, which I didn't claim to be an engineer at that point, but I would have been all hands in an event like this. Take 10 clients per human being that you have, if that's your number. How do you start to restore like that? Like that's a thing that requires some forethought and some planning and some thinking.
You reminded me of something that we talked about at Right of Boom, which in financial services we called these. Has anybody here studied for the CISSP? No, maybe. There's something called reciprocal agreements. And a reciprocal agreement is kind of like, hey, if you get in trouble, I'll be there for you. And if I get in trouble, you'll be there for me. So you might even be sharing office space with a competitor of yours in a natural disaster scenario or whatever. Right. Commonly have these agreements, you see them a lot in financial services. And a lot of them, unfortunately, got exercised on 9/11. But what we're seeing is a lot of these MSPs that get in trouble, if you were at Right of Boom, Robert did a panel with Gary Pico where he talked about, he literally had MSPs taking a week off, telling their lead tech to take a week off and go and just embed with this other MSP. He had an MSP fly all the way across the country to help him. And was just like,
here in Maryland that was impacted, and I called them and they wouldn't take the call because I'm sure they were underwater, didn't know who I was ahead of time, didn't want to, didn't want to talk to somebody. But that's the reason why it should be in place ahead of time.
Right. So there's a question you did there too from recovery. How many trucks can you roll in a day? Right. And how many would you need to roll in order to recover all, a certain subset of your customers?
Well, and the other thing that was brought up that I don't remember where the conversation happened, and it may have been like a lunchtime conversation, but it was, imagine not just having to recover the servers for 50 clients into the cloud or whatever, but imagine reconnecting then 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 endpoints to those servers to get people back up and running. And do your customers know how to operate the VPN or do the next thing or the next thing that's involved in what that process looks like? So I think there's some end client training and some responsibility on both sides there to make sure that your customer understands that in a DR situation, you're not going to be able to put an engineer at every person's desk to help them connect to the next tool. They need to know how to do it, and they need to be practiced at it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of individual steps there that we just have taken for granted, I think.
Yeah. I mean, there's also another thing, which I think we talked about. Really, now at this point, I'm just trying to convince you to go to the next Write a Boom conference, but
it's one I won't miss. I mean, it was a great
we
conference.
talked about the financial burden of responding to this. Okay, great, you have cyber insurance, but they're not paying you right away. You're going to be operating and responding to a breach for weeks, and there might not be money coming in from your insurance provider. So you're taking out loans. One MSP literally had to sit his text down and say, I don't think I'm going to be able to pay you this week.
Yeah, I heard that.
Will you be able, if you won't continue to work, I understand. And they were all like, no, we're in this. We're going to do this together, which I think is awesome for the culture he built.
Yeah.
But that's another thing you have to think about, like the manpower, let alone asking for help. What about, how are you going to continue to pay people to work through what will likely be one of the most difficult events in their life that they'll face? After going through it, you will be closer than ever with those people, like a band of brothers and sisters. But, some people aren't going to go through that if you can't continue to help provide for their family. And, he ultimately made up for it and more for all of those employees that went through that situation with him. But man, can you imagine facing that as a business owner? What a tough, God, on top of the stress that you're dealing with, on top of that gut-wrenching feeling of having to ask your people to work for free. Otherwise your business faces extinction. There is so much mental gymnastics to this. And so,
yeah. But I think that goes to the conversation that you guys are having on the cyber call and why I think everybody should follow it. So if you guys haven't still, I'm going to throw that link out in chat one more time. These are very, very smart individuals who are thought leaders in our space, who are also having regular weekly conversations about expecting to get breached and doing the right things, because no amount of preparation can make you ready for it. But if we don't start at least admitting that it's a reality, that we have to anticipate that it's going to happen and play like it's going to happen, practice like it's going to happen, so that we know how to operate in come game time. This is the first place I really heard folks talking about that assume breach mentality and really bringing it into real life. And it was one of the things that kept me up at night at my MSP. I mean, it was the thing that scared the daylights out of me when I ran the MSP. So I think it's an opportunity for you guys to listen to some smart folks. I would encourage it when Write a Boom comes around next year. I would absolutely encourage everyone to sign up right after me, because I'm sure it's going to be limited seating and I don't want any of you to take my seat. But I think it's just an amazing opportunity to listen to some of the right conversations.
I think for something like this, especially something that's emotionally charged, right? I never like when people try to sell something or motivate through fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So one of the frameworks I ask whenever I'm put in a situation where I feel like that tactic is being used on me, I ask myself, what will happen if we do change? What will happen if we don't change? And I let the answer to that question and my own assessment based off the new data drive what I think we should do. And so, what I'll say is, don't take my word for it. Go back and do the mental math yourself. What would it mean for you and your business if you did change to doing BCR testing at scale? And what would it mean if you didn't change? And only you can answer that. That's a unique risk assessment to every business. But that's the mental math we all have to be doing, unfortunately, in this threat landscape, until we figure out how to better manage these threat actors.
With that, we're about out of time, but I'm going to take the one last opportunity as the dumb sales guy in the room to kind of turn around what Ryan said, because nobody likes to be sold to that way. But if you're not afraid, you're not paying attention. If you have any uncertainty, you're also not paying attention. And so there shouldn't be any doubt left that this is stuff that we have to work on. This is stuff where, a baby step today probably equates to miles in the end of, just ground covered when and if and when that you become the MSP that's involved in this. So, if you're in a peer group, have these conversations in your peer group. If you hang out with other MSPs, other places, get these conversations started. I love the concept of the reciprocal agreements. I think that's something you guys
Yeah.
can take away. That's a big win.
The other
And
thing that, you know, that there's a lot of stuff that I thought about in conversations with MSPs after. There's a lot of things with the tech stack you have. You have an RMM. Well, let's say shipping hard drives, downloading data from the cloud, or offsite recovery, or bare metal restores are all too cumbersome. What if you could just deploy a brand new server and have a bunch of configuration pre-ready to go inside your RMM that just stamps out servers?
Yeah.
And so you could just start rebuilding the environment and config managing it back to a place that it needs to be. Granted, you have to put some work into that, but like by thinking through this, you can start to get creative in how you're using your existing tech stack to help you through. And like most people wouldn't think of an RMM as a tool that could potentially help you with recovery. But it is if you're going to start recovering servers from scratch, which we heard from a lot of MSPs at Right of Boom, is ultimately what they had to do. A portion of the server environment, I think up to half for one MSP, they had to completely just rebuild from scratch.
Yeah.
Because the other 50% needed to be recovered from backups, and it was going to take too long to get to that other half.
Yeah. Yeah.
So definitely a lot to think about there. So,
but the important step is the first step, right? We've got to do something. So plan a pizza Friday. Take that first step with your teams. And with that, Marty and I both have 4 o'clock calls and have to run. But thanks everybody for coming. Ryan, thanks so much.
Ryan. We're super appreciative.
Thanks for having me.
Definitely appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, bye.
Good
I
weekends,
look for
everybody.
recording this on Monday, guys.